Carl Jung's greatest insight was not simply about empathy. It was about the profound journey that highly sensitive people must take when life wounds them. For Jung, the path wasn't about staying fragile or forever defined by pain. It was about the transformation from wounded to warrior. A passage that can either shatter a person completely or reveal a strength so deep they never knew it was there. In his studies of individuation and the archetype of the wounded healer, Jung uncovered a striking pattern. He noticed that people with heightened emotional sensitivity often fell into one of two paths. Some remained trapped in cycles of victimhood, repeating their suffering endlessly, while others chose a braver road. These individuals stepped into what Jung called shadow integration, facing the parts of themselves they had rejected, and through this, becoming whole, authentic, and powerful. Jung saw this as nothing less than alchemy. Transformation wasn't gradual or mild. It was explosive, life-changing, a rebirth. Sensitive people, he realized, carried within them the potential to turn their pain into wisdom, their scars into strength. He called it the wounded healer potential, and he believed this wasn't just personal therapy. It was humanity's deepest task, to transform unconscious suffering into conscious strength, to evolve into our truest selves. One of Jung's breakthroughs came from a patient who perfectly embodied the paradox of the wounded healer. This person had remarkable insight into the pain of others. They could guide, comfort, and heal those around them with almost supernatural ability. And yet, they themselves remained trapped, chained to their own wounds. What shook Jung was that this patient wasn't helpless. They actively resisted their own healing. They clung to their pain as if it were a prized possession. To them, letting go of the wound meant losing their empathy, their sense of purpose, even their uniqueness. Healing, in their mind, was a threat. Through careful observation, Jung realized this was not an isolated case. Sensitive individuals often bind themselves to their suffering. They mistake being hurt for being helpful, confuse suffering with sensitivity, and even equate victimhood with virtue. The wound becomes their identity, their badge of meaning. And so, they resist healing, because without it, they don't know who they'd be. Jung named this dynamic wound attachment. He found that many sensitive people maintain their suffering because it feels essential to who they are. Three forces tend to reinforce this identity: shadow rejection. Many empaths project their anger, selfishness, or strength onto others, while insisting on seeing themselves only as purely loving. They fear their own shadow, because strength reminds them of the people who once abused them. Power, in their eyes, equals cruelty, suffering as currency. Pain can become a strange kind of wealth. Sympathy, attention, even moral superiority flow toward those who are visibly wounded. Jung noted that some even compete, subtly or openly, over who has suffered more. Healing threatens to bankrupt this system. Identity terror. For many, pain is the scaffolding of their entire identity. Relationships, life choices, even their sense of purpose revolve around their wounds. To step beyond suffering feels like death, because it means giving up the familiar self and stepping into the unknown. Perhaps Jung's most unsettling discovery was what he called powerlessness addiction. He saw that many empaths unconsciously cling to helplessness. Why? Because it secretly serves them. Helplessness protects them from risk, absolves them from responsibility, and even makes them feel safe in their suffering. Over time, this sense of weakness becomes addictive. It offers a payoff that strength cannot match. But Jung was clear. The path forward requires breaking this addiction. Real transformation means moving from victim to victor, from wounded to whole. It means no longer using pain as a shield, but as a teacher. It means allowing the shadow in, not as an enemy, but as part of the self. For Jung, the rise from wounded to warrior wasn't just one person's healing. It was the highest form of human psychological development. To integrate the shadow, to turn pain into power, to embrace authentic selfhood. This is the soul's true work. And when sensitive souls choose this path, they don't just survive. They become warriors of the spirit, able to stand tall in their own truth and light the way for others. Carl Jung spent years uncovering a hidden pattern that still traps countless people today: the silent addiction to victimhood. He noticed that when we cling to our wounds, we gain a ready-made excuse for why we can't chase our goals, make hard changes, or take real risks. The identity of the wounded one becomes a shield against failure, judgment, and the pressure of living fully. But it's a prison disguised as safety, one that demands nothing of us except endless suffering. True empowerment requires courage, action, and responsibility. Yet many highly sensitive people unconsciously discover another form of control: helplessness. Jung saw that empaths often use their victimhood to pull on guilt, sympathy, or the rescuing instincts of others. Their weakness becomes a quiet manipulation, a way to get needs met without ever asking directly. He called this inverse power. Influencing others not with strength, but with suffering. And for many, it feels safer than openly setting boundaries or speaking their needs. Some even use their pain as proof of moral superiority, as if their suffering elevates them above others. Their wounds become a badge of sensitivity, of spirituality, of awareness. But this is a dangerous trap, what Jung described as suffering narcissism. Instead of using pain as fuel for growth, it becomes a source of ego, making healing feel like a loss of specialness rather than a step into freedom. One of the most tragic blocks Jung identified is the fear of becoming the oppressor. Many empaths confuse power with abuse because those who hurt them misused power. The result? They avoid their own strength, terrified that stepping into it will turn them cruel. But by rejecting conscious power, they remain in unconscious powerlessness, which, ironically, often enables more harm. Jung was clear. Recognizing these patterns is not about self-blame. It's about shining light on the hidden dynamics that hold us back from becoming who we're meant to be. Jung outlined 4 stages that sensitive people walk through as they grow from wounded victims into integrated warriors. Stage 1, the unconscious absorber. At this stage, empathy feels like a curse. These people soak up the emotions of everyone around them, overwhelmed and powerless. They attract drama and toxic relationships that reinforce their belief that the world is cruel and they are helpless. Transformation begins when they realize their sensitivity is not proof of unfairness, but a signal pointing toward their growth. Stage 2, the wounded helper. Here, empaths begin using their pain to help others, but secretly keep their victim identity alive. They fear that healing might rob them of their ability to connect. They mistake their wounds for their gift, not yet realizing that true empathy deepens when the self is whole. Growth comes when they see that healing themselves makes them more capable of offering genuine, lasting support. Stage 3, the shadow integrator. In this stage, empaths start reclaiming the parts of themselves they once denied. Anger, self-interest, power, and the ability to say no. This is frightening because it challenges their image of being purely good. They may feel guilty for expressing these emotions, worried they're becoming like those who once harmed them. But the breakthrough comes when they see that owning their shadow doesn't corrupt them. It makes them real. It frees them from projecting hidden darkness onto others, and paradoxically, it makes them more compassionate. Stage 4. The Integrated Warrior. This is the culmination. Here, empathy and strength finally merge into what Jung called conscious empathy. Integrated warriors feel deeply, yet remain steady. They can help others without abandoning themselves. They lead, heal, and inspire, not because they are free of wounds, but because they've turned those wounds into wisdom. The path from wounded to warrior is one of the hardest roads in human psychology. Jung warned of several hazards that can derail the journey. The most terrifying is the identity annihilation crisis. When letting go of the victim identity feels like death itself. For empaths who've built their entire sense of self on suffering, healing can feel like being erased. Many retreat back into familiar pain, unable to face the fear of not knowing who they are beyond their wounds. Depression, anxiety, and deep despair often appear here. Another hazard Jung noted is the relationship apocalypse. As empaths grow stronger and reclaim power, old relationships built on imbalance may collapse. Friends, partners, or family who once benefited from their powerlessness may resist or even sabotage their growth. Yet for those who endure, a new life emerges. A life where empathy is not weakness, where sensitivity is not a curse, and where wounds no longer define identity. Jung's message is timeless. You are not meant to stay trapped in your pain. Your suffering can be transformed into strength, and your sensitivity can become the very source of your power. Carl Jung saw a pattern that continues to shake the lives of empaths. When healing begins, the world around them often resists. Families, friends, and partners who once benefited from their self-sacrifice can suddenly feel threatened. These people, sometimes unconsciously, try to pull the empath back into old roles, sabotaging growth to preserve the comfort of familiar dynamics. What should be a time of support often becomes a season of isolation. Jung warned that one of the most frightening stages comes when empaths face the parts of themselves they've long denied. Anger, self-interest, and the drive for power. Confronting these energies can feel like corruption, as if touching them means becoming a bad person. Without guidance, many retreat in fear, pushing their shadows back into the dark instead of integrating them. This keeps them trapped in a cycle of suppression rather than true wholeness. Another danger Jung identified is the attempt to leapfrog the shadow. Many empaths try to cover their wounds with spiritual language, talking about love, light, and transcendence, while skipping the hard work of integration. On the surface, this can look like healing, but underneath, unacknowledged wounds remain raw. When stress comes, the fragile facade collapses, leaving the empath more broken than before. Jung insisted that no amount of spiritual gloss could replace the raw, messy work of shadow integration. Then, there is the risk of inflation. As empaths begin to heal, some slip into grandiosity. They start believing their transformation has given them special status, judging others who are still caught in victimhood. They may claim superior gifts, or deeper insight, but this illusion stalls the process. Instead of authentic empowerment, inflation simply recreates the old hierarchy of superiority and inferiority. Another trap that keeps true healing out of reach. Jung did not leave empaths without tools. He developed clear practices to guide the wounded into becoming warriors. Instead of denying unwanted traits, Jung taught empaths to face them directly. He urged them to examine their harshest judgments of others, often mirrors of their own rejected qualities. Through dream analysis, expressive exercises, and therapeutic settings, he encouraged the safe exploration of anger, selfishness, and power. The aim was not to become aggressive, but to weave every aspect of the personality into a complete, balanced self. Conscious boundaries. For empaths who confuse boundaries with cruelty, Jung designed boundary training. He showed that walls which shut everyone out are not the same as healthy filters that allow meaningful connection. Skills like saying no without guilt, recognizing manipulation without surrender, and holding emotional sovereignty became essential. Far from reducing empathy, these boundaries preserve it by preventing burnout and resentment. Jung recognized that empaths must reclaim their right to power. Instead of fearing they'll become like those who once hurt them, they must learn to express needs directly, speak truth even when uncomfortable, and step into leadership when their insight can serve others. True power, Jung taught, is not domination. It is sovereignty. Strength that benefits both self and community. Identity reconstruction. Perhaps the hardest step is building a new sense of self, beyond the role of the wounded one. Jung emphasized archetypal reorientation, moving from victim toward healer, teacher, or warrior. He encouraged empaths to explore talents and passions that have nothing to do with trauma, to discover how sensitivity can serve creativity or collective good. The goal was to help from a place of wholeness, not depletion. Jung's research revealed a stark divide between those who complete this journey and those who remain trapped. Successful integration means transforming wounds into wisdom, while failure leaves people chained to the identity of suffering. One shining example is Viktor Frankl. A survivor of the Holocaust, Frankl refused to let victimhood define him. Instead, he transformed his unimaginable suffering into logotherapy, a healing philosophy that has guided millions toward meaning in life's darkest hours. He turned pain into purpose, exactly the transformation Jung envisioned. For empaths, the road from wounded victim to integrated warrior is not gentle. It is full of traps. Sabotage from loved ones, terror of the shadow, the lure of spiritual bypass, and the explosion of ego. Yet with courage and conscious practice, it is possible to step into strength without losing sensitivity, to lead without oppression, and to heal without collapsing. Carl Jung once observed that real transformation isn't about escaping pain, but learning how to carry it without letting it break you. Viktor Frankl embodied this truth. Even after enduring the horrors of the Holocaust, he held on to his deep sensitivity to human suffering. Yet he found a way to transform that pain into resilience, allowing him to guide others without being shattered all over again by their wounds. His story shows that it's possible to feel deeply and still remain strong. The same was true for Nelson Mandela. 27 years behind prison walls could have left him bitter and broken. Instead, he turned those decades of oppression into fuel for something larger. Mandela became the living picture of Jung's wounded healer. He led not only his people, but inspired the entire world with an empathy rooted in his suffering. He forgave without excusing. He loved humanity without surrendering to his oppressor's cruelty. He drew clear boundaries for justice and equality, but carried compassion even for those who had hurt him. Mandela's greatness was that he refused to stay trapped in the role of a victim. Instead, he honored what his suffering taught him about dignity, about strength, about forgiveness, and then built something powerful from it. But Jung also warned of another path: failure in integration. He described people who never move beyond their wounds, who instead make their entire identity out of them. Some even build careers on their trauma, becoming what Jung called trauma entrepreneurs. These are the ones who profit from their pain, but resist true healing because it would threaten the identity, the sympathy, or even the relationships they've built around being a victim. They may appear to help others, but often it is from a place of shared brokenness rather than integrated strength. Instead of empowering, they create dependency. Instead of freedom, they reinforce the cycle of suffering. So what separates transformation from stagnation? Jung pointed to a few critical elements. The first is responsibility. Choosing to heal rather than waiting for someone to rescue you. The second is perspective. Seeing wounds not as life sentences, but as teachers. And the third is courage. The willingness to let go of the benefits of victimhood, like sympathy or lowered expectations, in order to claim authentic empowerment. Jung called this kind of change psychological heroism. It demands facing painful truths, enduring discomfort, and refusing to shrink back even when society pressures you to stay the same. Jung also recognized that empaths cannot walk this road alone. They need communities that encourage growth rather than feeding victim patterns. He called attention to growth catalysts. The people who support transformation by celebrating boundaries, honoring success, and refusing to enable drama. These are mentors and friends who embody integrated strength and show, by example, that sensitivity and power can coexist. In contrast, he warned against wound-bonded relationships. Connections built on shared trauma. These bonds may feel intimate, but they often keep both people trapped, competing over whose suffering is greater, and resisting one another's healing if it threatens the bond. True support means creating relationships where both people are free to evolve. From this vision grew Jung's idea of transformation communities. Places where sensitivity is honored, growth is expected, and healing is nurtured. These might be therapy groups that focus on empowerment rather than endless trauma retelling, creative communities where pain fuels art, or spiritual circles where integration is valued over avoidance. In these spaces, empaths find proof that they don't have to choose between being sensitive and being strong. They can be both. Finally, Jung mapped out what he saw as the 5 phases of empath evolution. The first is the painful recognition of wounds, which often feels unbearable at first. The second is the confrontation with the shadow, owning anger, selfishness, and power without becoming destructive. The third is building boundaries, testing them, and enduring the pushback from those who preferred you weak. These stages are not easy. They shake identity, disrupt relationships, and stir fear. But they are the very steps that turn pain into wisdom and victims into warriors. The message is clear. Suffering does not have to define you, but it can refine you. Transformation is never simple, but it is possible. And for those who choose to walk it with courage, responsibility, and authentic empathy, the path leads from woundedness into a strength that serves not only yourself, but the world. The real turning point for empaths comes when they stop fearing disappointment and start respecting their own boundaries. Growth accelerates the moment they can hear someone's frustration, disapproval, or anger, and not immediately cave in, just to restore harmony. That's when the shift from self-sacrifice to authentic strength truly begins. At this stage, empaths reclaim their personal power. They stop defining themselves only through the pain of others and begin pursuing goals that belong to them. Their sensitivity becomes a tool, not a trap. They learn to speak their truth clearly, to chase ambitions without guilt, and to step into leadership roles when their insights can serve the greater good. For the first time, their gift of empathy fuels purpose rather than exhaustion. The final stage is what Jung called conscious empathy. Here, empaths carry both deep sensitivity and unshakable strength. They can feel another's pain without being crushed by it. They can offer help without draining themselves dry. From this integration emerges a new kind of leader. Teachers, healers, visionaries, who show by example that empathy and resilience are not opposites, but partners. These warriors of the heart stand as living proof that wounds can become wisdom. If you're learning to protect your sensitivity instead of giving it away, you might recognize yourself in this journey. You're turning scars into strength. You're proving, in Jung's words, that transformative suffering can lift not just the individual, but the community as well. Of course, not every empath completes this journey. Jung identified certain traps that keep people stuck halfway between victimhood and empowerment. The spiritual bypass. This is when empaths use meditation, affirmations, or lofty forgiveness to avoid doing the real psychological work. They cling to light while denying the shadow. Jung called this pseudo-transcendence, a fragile layer of spirituality that crumbles under stress, dropping the person right back into victim patterns. Real growth requires facing the shadow, not floating above it. The victim-to-perpetrator swing. Some empaths, sick of being powerless, overcorrect. They replace submission with aggression, using domination to shield themselves. But this isn't true empowerment. It's fear in disguise. Jung warned that real strength protects without attacking, combining power with compassion. The superiority complex. Others fall into grandiosity, believing their healing makes them more evolved than those still struggling. But superiority is just another mask for insecurity. Authentic empowerment carries humility, recognizing that growth is lifelong. The isolation trap. Finally, some empaths withdraw completely, mistaking solitude for safety. While alone time is useful, permanent withdrawal blocks growth. Healing requires practicing new boundaries inside relationships, not avoiding them. Jung advised gradual re-engagement with people who support transformation and distance from those who don't. Jung believed this transformation was not just personal, but cultural. Empaths who complete the wounded to warrior journey serve as living models of integrated consciousness. They show humanity a path between emotional suppression and emotional chaos. They become the cultural warriors who demonstrate that sensitivity and strength can and must coexist. In relationships, these transformed empaths pioneer healthier dynamics. They prove that intimacy doesn't require self-erasure, and that boundaries don't weaken connection, but deepen it. Jung called this conscious partnership. a bond built on mutual empowerment instead of silent sacrifice. On a larger scale, these warriors help communities process collective trauma. Because they've already faced their own shadows, they can enter painful spaces without being consumed. They provide perspective when emotions run hot, and stability when societies are in flux. In times of cultural upheaval, such people are invaluable. For Jung, each wounded to warrior transformation contributes to humanity's overall evolution. Every empath who integrates their shadow adds to the collective wisdom about resilience, empathy, and wholeness. Together, they move culture forward, teaching by example that compassion does not mean weakness and that power does not require cruelty. This is why the journey is unstoppable. It takes what once seemed like the empath's greatest liability, their raw sensitivity, and transforms it into their most potent strength. The rise of the warrior empath shows that the real problem was never sensitivity itself, but the lack of integration that left it unprotected. When wounds are honored but not idolized, they become teachers. When empathy is combined with boundaries, it becomes unbreakable. And when shadow is faced and integrated, the result is resilience that no storm can undo. The warrior who emerges from this process is not hardened or cold. They are still capable of deep feeling, but now they have the backbone to match their heart. They can witness suffering without drowning in it. They can give without depleting themselves. They can hold compassion while still honoring their own dignity and needs. This is the essence of the wounded healer archetype Jung saw as humanity's highest potential. It is the transformation of pain into wisdom, of wounds into strength, of victimhood into service. And once begun, this rise cannot be stopped, because it aligns with the psyche's natural drive toward wholeness. Every empath who chooses warrior over victim is not only healing themselves, but also adding to humanity's story of evolution. Each one becomes living evidence that resilience and empathy, when fused, can change both a life and a culture. So if you feel the call, if you are tired of carrying wounds as chains, know this: your sensitivity is not something to overcome. It is something to honor, to guard, and to grow into strength. This is your journey from wounded to warrior, and it matters. For you, for those you love, and for the future we are building together.